Welcome back to the Ethan Clerc Podcast Show. We have a great guest for you tonight, and for everyone that is tuning in for the first time, this is a show about society, culture, the weird things all around us, and pretty much anything else we want to talk about. Before I introduce our guest, I want to introduce the two co-hosts who have joined me for 5 episodes, and I can't believe they're still here.
I can't believe we're on 5 episodes.
I haven't introduced you yet. Man with Sunkiss, Tylan Porath.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And of course, how could I go anywhere without my brother Colin? Thanks
nice
for being
to be here again.
Thanks for
having
here.
me, Ethan.
Bass Pheasant Ranch, eh?
You got it.
And we wouldn't have a show tonight if it weren't for the man, the myth, the legend, Adrian Lee. Thanks for coming out.
Wow, that's very kind of you. Everything from now on is going to be downhill on the back of the introduction, you know that.
Well, Adrian, we really appreciate you coming out, and I know a lot of people know who you are, but I'm sure there's quite a few people who haven't heard of you. So can you kind of give us a little bit of a background of who you are and how do you end up in Wyndham?
That's a long story, so I'll keep it very short. Ultimately, I'm an author. I write books. So I have several publishers. I write books about ghosts, hauntings, the paranormal. I write about history. I'm actually a historian by trade. I have qualifications at the highest level in history, and I was lecturing history in Europe for the longest time.
Oh, wow.
I'm a psychic. I founded the International Paranormal Society many years ago back in Britain. I have teams all over the world.
Wow.
The idea being that I could just roll up in Amsterdam or Berlin or Madrid or somewhere exotic. Someone would meet me and we could go on an investigation. So that seemed like a good plan, really.
And you'd have a place to stay.
Absolutely. That's key to everything, isn't it, ultimately?
Yeah.
And I did end up in Wyndham on the back of the fact that obviously I'm a stranger in a strange land. You might recognise my accent's not from here. I'm actually from Iowa, but I put this on to get the girls. This is where they are. So I came to Wyndham. When you land in a foreign country, you tend to go to the places where your friends are. So the first people I met lived in this area. So this is ultimately where I ended up.
Wow.
But as an author, of course, with modern technology, you can go wherever you want and you can write. And I'm a radio host. I do TV work. I'm a producer. I have a radio show that's very popular. We have 100,000 listeners in 190 countries all over the world, and people tune in at 8 p.m. on a Friday evening to listen to that. So it's interesting getting fan mail from places I've never visited, countries I'm never likely to go to. And isn't it interesting that you could make people laugh in far-flung places with modern technology? It's quite remarkable. The work I do could never have been done 10 years ago.
That's crazy.
You couldn't have written the things I do. You couldn't research historically. I did a lot of research for my latest book, Mysterious Midwest, sat at home in my parents' house using the internet, because all the newspapers for all the small towns that I investigated paranormally throughout the Midwest, you can access everything online now.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to go to some small, damp, miserable antediluvian basement in the middle of nowhere, you know, with a stern German woman looking at you in case you mess up her cataloguing system. And all that can be done from home. It's quite remarkable. So modern technology means I can now do the work that I do.
Wow. In Wyndham. And you're from Britain, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
awesome.
I'm from London
and
originally.
You ended up in Wyndham, which is crazy. Just, I mean, to think that someone from way over there would end up in small town Minnesota.
Well, Wyndham is just like London, of course. It's got the same nightlife, the same museums, galleries, opera, ballet, jazz clubs. I mean, it's very similar, isn't it?
Cottonwood County Historical Society.
There you go.
Compare that to the Louvre.
I've spent many hours actually in the Cottonwood Historical Society.
Oh, I'm not putting that down at all. Big difference though to come from Britain to Wyndham. And you said how many books have you written? 4?
I'm a bit further down the road than that. I'm on about 6 or 7
now. 6 or 7.
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are they all about Midwest? Or are they about Minnesota or all over the world? Or do you just typically write about this area?
There's a mixture of things going on. I've written Mysterious Minnesota, which was 13 haunted locations you would know, some of the most historic sites in the whole of Minnesota. So we go from the Schmidt Brewery to the SS William Irving. Obviously, I've been to Fort Snelling, because I think every child in Minnesota, it's the law that you have to go to Fort Snelling at some point, I guess. But the Midwest is a bit more expansive. The book on the Midwest has 23 locations. And I'm in Iowa and Wisconsin and South Dakota. But a couple of my books, I've written books purely about history. I've written a book about the early contact between the Native American Indians and the first pioneers in Stearns County and around Sauk Centre. And I've also written a book called How to Be a Christian Psychic, what the Bible says about healers, mediums and paranormal investigators. And the books I'm contracted to write now are going to have a more universal feel. I think I needed to write more local interest books as a validation for what I'm now going on to do, which is ultimately things like what are ghosts, looking at UFOs and ghosts and the things they've got in common. So there's a ufology book that I'm contracted to put out, and lots of other interesting projects that I can't talk about due to non-disclosure agreements, but very interesting and very unique stuff that's going to take me out of kind of Minnesota and have more global appeal, because those books are great, but you've got to be interested in Minnesota history and ghosts.
It's a niche market.
So already you've noticed that, right? Yeah. So my Venn diagram has very few people sat in the middle. So it's an interesting expectation. It's a strange way of going around the country and learning. I think I probably know more about the history of Minnesota than most Minnesotans through the amount of traveling and the amount of work I do with historical societies. But whether you believe in ghosts or not, what I do is I go to historical societies all over, and most of them know who I am. I work very closely with them. When I've investigated their buildings, when I've investigated their historic properties, I then go back, I present my evidence, I give a talk about the history of the building, the history of the location. I'm doing one in a couple of weeks' time, actually, in Morton. In Renville County. If they have 300 or 400 people turn up and they sell tickets at $5 each, they're making a lot of capitation for non-profit organisations on the back of letting me in. So as a historian, I want these buildings to still be here in 100 years' time. And unfortunately, and it pains me to say it, this country has a great habit of knocking buildings down because you need another car park. Do you see what I mean? So this has a money-raising side to it that I think people don't realise. And if, again, you don't believe in ghosts, if you read the chapter on Wyndham, for example, whether you believe in ghosts or not, they're coming into the town and they're eating in the bars, they're eating in the restaurants, they're visiting the shops, they're staying in the hotels, and everything is in terms of bringing up the economy. So, you know, some people complain about the work I do, but they don't understand the non-profit and the raising of money that then goes with that as a historian, if you like.
Yeah. Well, you talked about, you said 13 places in Minnesota for your book about Minnesota?
For the Minnesota one, yeah.
And that's interesting to me. What is the most haunted location in Minnesota that you've been to, in your opinion?
In my opinion, and there's lots of them that could come into this list, I would say it's the soap factory in Minneapolis.
Really?
It's a miserable pit of a building. It's a 3-story, last unconverted warehouse in the whole of Minnesota on the banks of the Mississippi. And it's used as an art gallery now. They have students in there producing artwork. The history of making soap is a miserable business.
Really?
When they suddenly discovered in the 1870s, 1880s about germology and bacteria, they then decided it would be a good idea if the working classes actually washed their hands occasionally and actually took a bath more than once a year. Right? So what they decided to do was to build a soap factory, and Minneapolis was the biggest centre for making soap in the whole of America back at the turn of the last century.
I didn't know that.
This is a miserable way of making soap. You boil up dog carcasses, cat carcasses to make the lye. Yeah. So thousands and thousands and thousands of dogs and cats and horses, and I suspect some gangsters, were boiled up to make the soap. So when you're walking around this disused factory, you've got tens of thousands of deaths, like walking around an abattoir, I guess.
Yeah.
Everything you touch the railings to walk up the stairs, and there's like grease everywhere. There's stalactites hanging from the ceiling of grease, and it feels... in your stomach, there's a nausea. You don't have to be psychic. It's like walking through paranormal syrup. It's very thick, very heavy. There was an epidemic of wild dogs in Minneapolis in the 1880s, 1890s. They estimated there was 30,000 wild dogs running around.
Wow.
So the local government thought it was a really good idea to give everyone $1 for every dog they could capture. And then they would throw them over the wall of the soap factory. The problem with that is that every recidivist, every person that didn't want to work for a living or had some sort of criminal inclination, you'd take your dog outside, little Fifi, a little poodle, and then you'd come back and it would be gone.
It could be gone.
And then 3 weeks later, someone's washing their hands with it. So they had to stop doing that because suddenly people were stealing dogs left, right, and centre.
Crazy.
But if you're asking me, that's a miserable pit of a building. It has death all over it. The slaughtering that took place there was immense, and I've photographed ghosts there. There was a poltergeist activity. Just to add to that mix, before it became a soap factory, it was actually a building that was used to make prosthetic limbs for Civil War soldiers that had lost arms and legs during the Civil War. So you've got all these people in Minnesota, and of course Minnesota provided a large number of soldiers for the Union because they'd only just become a state, and they wanted to show the Union that they were willing to contribute. So a vast numbers of soldiers lost their arms and legs to mini balls, and they would go there. So they're bringing all that battlefield energy.
That's crazy.
All of the pain and suffering. So this land, in many respects, is miserable. But it's a long way of answering your question. But I'm going to put my
That's your answer.
pin down and say it's the soap factory.
And I think I know where that's at. Downtown Minneapolis, is it right by Pillsbury, the mill?
It's next door. The interesting thing is they have a Halloween house experience.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
And there's some things about that that are very odd. This is such a impressive Halloween experience, if you want to use that word, that I've waited to investigate this building, and I've investigated it 6 or 7 times in the last 10 years. I've actually seen people come out of that haunted house experience and they've urinated themselves.
Really?
So again, I'm not a big fan. I'm a paranormal investigator, but I hate horror films.
Really?
And I hate stuff. I'm more afraid of the living than I am of the dead, is where we are. And I don't understand why you'd want to go down there, urinate yourself, and watch lots of unemployed drama students running around with broken chainsaws.
They can grab you, I'm pretty sure.
That was the thing about that one. They could like get physical with you and all kinds of stuff. It's
you have to sign a waiver to enter that building.
So to add to everything I've just said, there's an idea that you can produce a ghost or a negative energy or a demonic entity through thinking about it. It's called a thought form. In Nepalese culture, it's called a tulpa. If everyone in this room thinks there's a ghost in this building called Fred, a ghost in this building called Fred would manifest itself. Do you see what I mean?
Interesting.
So being scared, having people jumping out on you, having all that energy of negativity is going to attract any darkness or any energy that wants to use that as a finger buffet. There's a similar location in London, in the south of London, just behind the back of the Thames in Tooley Street, called the London Dungeons, and it's a history of torture and execution, and they show props and people jump out of you.
Wow.
And I've been there and investigated, but it used to be a wine cellar. Nothing bad has ever happened there. I think the place is haunted because people are jumping and bringing energy with them. And any negative energies are then going to come to that location and think, wow, we're going to feed on this energy. And I think it attracts them like a catalyst. So there's another layer there on top of the soap factory.
So people, if you have a large group of people who think there's a ghost will appear from, is that what you're kind of saying?
It's more a case of, if you're, well, there's 2 levels to this. If you're scared, if there's a group of people, you work in film, that collective energy of everyone in the cinema laughing at the same time, jumping at the same time, crying at the same time, creates energy. This is why I hate these edge of the town, huge warehouse type cinemas where you're sat there and there's only 3 people there, right? I remember the days in London where we'd go and see Star Wars in 1977 and the cinema was packed and there'd be a standing ovation. People were lined up outside and there was a huge amount of energy to collective kind of humanism. So that's the first level. But the point I was making with the tulpa and the thought form is there's a school of thought that says if enough collective people believe a building to be haunted, they can manifest a haunting by collective thinking. And that's not that crazy, because when you pray and when you go to church, that's positive collective thinking. So what happens if you get together and have negative collective thinking? Just see, there's no difference other than what you're putting in place as either being negative or positive.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's a very interesting way to look at it, and it definitely makes me want to do more research and kind of dive into it and see, the whole thought process behind that. But me personally, I don't know about these guys, but me personally, I'm kind of a skeptic about the whole thing, about paranormal, ghost stuff like that, because I think the biggest thing it comes down to is people have a hard time believing if they can't see something or they never had an experience. But I'm definitely open to any kind of stuff like that happening to me.
What I would add to that is I've never seen a baseball game, but I know baseball exists. And I think unless you see it, I spend all my weekends, I did 30 investigations last year in historic buildings. If you put yourself in a location enough times, you will end up seeing something. During the course of your average day, it's unlikely that you're going to come across something that you would consider to be a ghost. And maybe in someone's lifetime, they may come across 2 or 3 entities by accident almost, bumping into them. If you're constantly putting yourself in locations that are known to be haunted and you do enough research, like bird spotting, if we sat in a field for 3 weeks in a hide, at some point the bird's going to come along. So my response to you would be, I deal with skeptics all the time. For some of them, no amount of evidence is ever going to be enough. For the believer, no amount of evidence is necessary. I've taken non-believers on investigations. We've seen ghosts walk through walls. I've turned around to them and said, well, what do you think about that? And they still don't believe.
Really?
Because it's challenging their religious views, their paradigms, their ways of thinking. So I've given up trying. It's not my job to convince anyone this exists, but I think you're right. I think once you have that experience, you're then thinking to yourself, what happened there? But if you give yourself a chance to see more and place yourself in situations, you're obviously improving the opportunity you're going to get to have some contact at some point.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I know that on the way up here, I was talking to you. You said that you've investigated here at the Bark.
That's correct.
And the Bark, is it haunted or is it safe? Or what are your thoughts on this building?
Everything's safe. Most spirits, 95% of spirits are incredibly polite, incredibly friendly. It's your grandparents. It's your great-grandparents.
Okay.
They're nice people. It's me and you when we're dead, ultimately. The problem you come across is that everyone listening to this right now knows a grumpy old man. So when you're a grumpy old man when you're alive, guess what? You're going to be a grumpy old man when you're dead. So if someone's turning your lights on and off, slamming doors, pushing you around, it's 9 times out of 10 a grumpy old man that just doesn't ultimately want you there. So the first thing I'm going to say is that everything's good. If you fell over on the sidewalk, if you broke down on I-90, someone will come and help you.
Yeah.
Society, generally speaking, is very polite and very friendly, bar the 1 or 2 people that we all know, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what's in the building?
Yeah, the Bark. What do you think about it?
Surprisingly enough, it is active. But
Really?
then schools would tend to be active. If you think about a school in terms of where it sits, it's a microcosm of society. You've got people that are falling in love for the first time.
Yep.
People that are being bullied. People are having fun together. They're working together. Just that collective. And you know about the link between puberty, for example, and then poltergeist activity. Children generate a lot of energy. And of course, this has been a building and it's a footprint that's had children going through it in their thousands and thousands since the early 1930s. So to answer your question, this building's full of kids. They've got a chance to run around. They've got a chance to be back at school. If your favourite time in your life was when you were messing around at school with your friends, then in spirit, wouldn't you be messing around at school with your friends? And you can do all the things you weren't allowed to do when you were here, ultimately.
Interesting. Yeah.
So when I was in the corridors and investigating this building, there just was a lot of kids running around. And they didn't realise I could see them, or we had the equipment to see them. So they were messing around and pulling faces and do all the things kids do.
Wow.
When I acknowledged the fact that we could see them, they all laughed and kind of ran in different directions. But there was a lot of poltergeist activity. We measured a lot of energy in the rooms. We have empirical data in terms of electrical magnetic fields and the things we've got.
And how long was that? How long ago did you investigate here? We
did 2 investigations here with a big team. There was about 12 of us all together.
Oh, wow.
And I would say that was probably 7 or 8 years ago we did that. And there's lots of audio. I also did the library in town. I've investigated there twice.
Yeah. Yep.
And we did the theatre. And on the back of the theatre, we raised some money when they were looking to get a digital projector.
Yeah,
so
I do remember that.
Yeah, so we spoke about the idea of raising money on the back of that. So I have done quite a few things in town.
Yeah. Well, the reason I brought up the Bark thing is because you said to put yourself in situations or whatever where there's a high level of spirits or whatever. And I've spent unbelievable amount of time here in this building. Right. And I can't even think of one time that I've seen or heard something, which maybe that's part of the reason I'm so skeptical, is because I've been in all these places that are haunted and I've never personally heard or seen anything. Right. So it makes it hard for me to to think or believe in anything like that.
From my perspective, all my books are written uniquely from the spirits and the ghosts giving me information. So I'm a historian. The books are 85,000 words. They're 300 pages, and it's the history of Minnesota and the history of the Midwest. But it's been lost to the knowledge of man. That history has been lost. The only reason it now exists and I'm presenting it and adding to the canon of history is the ghosts and spirits told me about it. So I do investigations. The individuals I'm talking to give me their names, they give me their dates, they tell me the things that went on. I take that information, go to the Historical Society, find it, and then represent that.
Wow.
So as a skeptic, you would have to then wonder how the books are written outside of the fact that I'm making it up. But everything's referenced. That's the point. And I can give you a couple of examples of that. You're aware of the old school building in Morton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disused property. One of the most haunted buildings I've been in.
Really?
In this area, actually. Schools. I might write a book on the haunting of schools at some point. I spoke to a ghost in one of the rooms, and I've got all this recorded. I can come back and play you the recordings of this. And a lady came through and said her name was Foss, and she told me 4 or 5 times. She said she worked there. She said she was an English teacher. I had the head and the curator of the Historical Society with me from Renville County. So there were people there that weren't, paranormal investigators as well. I then go to the Historical Society and find that the lady had died, and she was named Esther Foss, and that was her room, and she taught English there. In Danube, there's a railway station that's now a museum in Renville County. I go into the railway station, it's now a museum. Psychically, I thought there was a spirit there called Ben, so I wrote his name down and I verbalised that to my team and said, there's someone here called Ben. We turn on the equipment, and we've got audio equipment where you can hear them talking. It picks up their voices. And I ask, who's here? And I get the name Ben. And I say, do you prefer being called Ben or Benjamin? And he said, Ben. I said, what's your last name? I can't do any research unless you give me your last name. And he said his name was Horst. And he said that 3 or 4 times. And I had a long conversation with him. I then went to the Historical Society on the Monday in Morton in Renville County, went through their filing cabinet, and they've got all their obituaries in alphabetical order. I look up Horst, and there's a folder that says Benjamin Horst.
Really?
I pull out the folder, and there's a newspaper article from the late 1960s that said he died on the railway crossing in Danube because his car got hit by a train.
Unbelievable.
Really?
Now, the Historical Society doesn't know about this. No one knows about this. It's been forgotten.
Wow.
No one remembers it. That's now being reintroduced to the canon of history, and you've had psychic work that's been corroborated with empirical data that I can play you where he says his name, and then I go to look that up historically, and you've got this triangle all feeding one another, and then how do you then say that you're skeptical? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Those history books don't get written any other way than that taking place. So it's a very powerful tool. No one else is writing these books and backing this up in the way I'm doing. But I'm writing history books.
Yeah.
But they've been written by the dead, ultimately.
Interesting. And when you bring up a story like that, it is very difficult to argue, that didn't happen or whatever, especially when you got a name and then you go to the Historical Society and that's an actual person, I
tell you what people do in a very kind of Hegelian way. People would then say to me, well, you went to the Historical Society first, you looked this stuff up, and then you present it, and you've got a walkie-talkie and you manipulate what comes through, and as if I've got the time.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Every minute,
Right, yeah.
And there's other people there as well. It's not just me, of course. There's people on the team that are historians. There's people there from the local Historical Society, the people that own the building.
Yeah.
I want citizens and civilians to come with me, because it's all very well me standing here and sitting here today and saying this happened, that happened.
That would be super cool.
If we spoke to the director of the Renville County Historical Society, if we spoke to the members that were part of the board that came with me, they'd sit here and say, yes, I was in that room and that happened. And that holds more weight than a foreigner sitting here and saying, I went in there and did this. Because everyone knows those individuals.
Yeah.
They went to school with them. They know who they are. Do you see what I mean? Rather than some strange English guy coming along and doing that. So I try and, answer everything and put everything in place to make another person's argument as difficult as possible.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Dalton, let's bring up we have a couple of videos here that I want you to kind of look at, Adrian. Just some other people's information that they found. Let's start with the National Geographic one, Dalt. See what they say about this whole thing.
And while Dalton's getting this pulled up, Adrian, I had a question for you.
Sure.
So when you're going in these buildings and you have all your equipment and all that, do you ever have any ghosts talking to you or anything before the equipment comes out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we capture a lot of stuff before. They know we're coming. They're aware of who we are. So a lot of times we get recordings. There was a very famous recording I made with my team in the Palmer House in Sauk Centre, and we were setting up the equipment. And while we were setting it up, you heard a voice come through and saying, 2 ghosts talking to one another. One said to the other one, are we dead? So you tend to pick up.
Jeez.
I have picked up on many occasions spirits and ghosts actually talking to one another without realising that I can hear them. So that's quite a common occurrence. But yes, to answer your question, almost to a degree, more goes on before and after when we're having banter and we're setting the equipment up.
Dang.
Almost
And
like
it's like they're doing that on purpose, you know, to kind of mess with you. While you're,
I don't think they're fully aware that they can be heard and that we know they're there. So it's almost like me and you having a chat in the background while my team kind of sets things up, really.
All right, let's check this out.
These orbs, supposedly the energy signatures of ghosts, may simply mean it's time to have the house cleaned. And those wild fluctuations in the electromagnetic field could mean you need an electrician, not a ghostbuster. But before we unleash the skeptics, we need to start with the basics. If ghosts exist, what exactly are the damn things? And are they really damned or just damn hard to pin down? For those of a skeptical bent, when it comes to ghosts, well, there's a lot less here than meets the eye.
The ghosts that I've witnessed and that I've been exposed to and that have been offered as examples are usually the results of poor understanding of technology, of psychology, or of perfectly ordinary events that happen to us all the time and can be misinterpreted.
For the believers, ghosts are as real as the living, and ghostly apparitions come in several flavors. First, there's the old standby. Ghosts are dead people. Dead people who had something like a transporter malfunction beaming from the here and now to the hereafter. That malfunction is usually caused by some sort of major trauma, like murder or suicide. Curiously, it's said these spirits often don't know they're dead. A second kind of apparition appears to be a mere echo of something that happened in the past, some sort of psychic residue. Like a looped videotape of a moment in time, this kind of haunting seems to have no will of its own and does not interact with the living. A third type is called a crisis apparition, when the dead are said to appear shortly after their deaths to people close to them. They are reputed to be aware of their deaths and can interact with the living, most often bringing messages of comfort.
All right. Well, what did you think about that video, Adrian? That's from National Geographic. They presented a lot of information in a short amount of time.
I've had to start making notes.
And I don't know a lot of what they're talking about in this video, so maybe you could kind of break it down, or what your thoughts are.
Sure, I will break it down. One of the main criticisms that investigator was making was the fact that people don't have an understanding of EMF and how things work. I'm then going to put another layer on top of this and say that the person narrating that doesn't have an understanding of how paranormal investigators work, and I'm going to break through that.
Okay.
He started off the section here, we spoke about orbs. Orbs are energy, but orbs do exist. I've seen them. I will agree with him 100%. 95% of all orb photographs I've seen are pollen, dust, moisture.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. If you fire a flash and take a photograph, if there's then a piece of dust that's reflecting the flash back to the camera, you will get that. I guarantee that if people listen to this show now, bash their sofa at home and take a photograph, you'll see them set free all the thousands of spirits that were living in their sofa. And if I had $1 for every person who's shown me an orb photograph, I would be rich. So I 100% agree with him. There is a but. There are orbs that generate their own energy. So I have seen orbs, almost like fairy lights. I almost wonder if the Victorian idea of fairies came from orbs that they then misinterpreted ultimately. Going back to Morton, I've got a fantastic photograph. I think I sent you a picture of an orb that was generating its own illumination.
Really?
So at that point, that's generating energy. That's not requiring a flash to be reflected. So I'm actually going to agree with him.
Okay.
95% of orbs are false positives. But there are orbs that generate their own energy, and he's not covered that, and they exist, and I've got photographs and I've got video of that.
Your photographs, like a ghost, does it look like an actual human being, or what does it look like?
There's a mixture of things. You see shadow people, which I think are ghosts that can't fully manifest themselves because they've run out of energy ultimately. If you turn light switches on and off and you slam doors, that requires energy. And over a period of time, that energy dissipates. I've only ever come across ghosts from 150 to 200 years ago, We've been cavemen for 2 million years, but I've never seen a caveman. So I believe that your energy dissipates over time. I've got bad news for everyone. I actually think you die twice. I think you die physically, and then your energy dies in spirit.
Well, before we go on with that, we're going to take a short break here, and we have a lot more to talk about with this video, but we will be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to the Ethan Clerc Podcast Show. We are here with professional paranormal expert and author and TV producer. I can't even go on. There's a big list of stuff. Adrian Lee.
There's many things I do badly. I just don't advertise them. That's where I am.
Adrian Lee. And we were watching a video beforehand. It was a National Geographic video. There was a lot of information in about 2.5 minutes. Sure. And Adrian wrote down some notes. I'm kind of interested to see what else you had about that video.
Yeah, we spoke briefly about orbs and the fact they do exist. But yes, there's lots of false positives, which is what they focused on. He spoke about EMF, he spoke about electrical magnetic fields, and he said it could just be the wiring in the house. Again, I agree with him. If you take the devices we have and you put them over circuit boards, light switches, they will give a reading. They're a constant though. If you've got problems with electrical magnetic fields in your house, it's a constant. What I'm looking at is spikes and things that aren't a constant and aren't mechanical. So for example, you may have a device sitting on the table and it's not registered any EMF for the entire vigil, and you've been there 3 or 4 hours, and you would then say to the spirit, if you're able to go through that device, if you're able to pick it up or go around it, sit on it, can you do that now? And then the device lights up. So you get a stimulus and response situation. You can have a very basic dialogue with a spirit based on that. So again, he's right, but there's always a but. You know, you do get spikes, and it's a mixture of all the equipment. EMF registers when everything else is lighting up, and you've got differences. You've got a static meter lighting up, you've got a changing air pressure, the humidity suddenly dropped, you've got cold spots. It's not just one piece of equipment sitting on its own. There's 10 pieces of equipment that all verify something's come along, and the EMF detector would ultimately do that. He spoke about the fact that ghosts and spirits haunt in a place where there's trauma. I would disagree with that as well. Yes, you have the car crash, and we spoke about that earlier. But ultimately, the children that were in this building, there was no trauma. You know, when I go to the cinema and I talk to the spirits of the cinema, there's no trauma there. They just enjoy being in those environments. If you built that building, if you lived in that building, if you've spent all your life around that building and you're intrinsic to that building, why wouldn't you hang out there with your friends? There's no trauma involved in that. It's said as well that spirits and ghosts don't know they're dead on occasion. In 25 years of investigating all over the world, I have never come across a ghost or a spirit that didn't realise they were dead. You would have to be pretty dense and pretty stupid to not be able to work out why you can walk through walls and when you're talking no one's acknowledging you. How long would that take? 30 seconds at most? You know, it's a remarkable thing that you wouldn't know that you're dead. I've never come across that. It's almost like a cliche or a stereotype that I've never actually come across in having contact with ghosts and spirits. The final thing I wanted to add is he spoke about residual hauntings, and he said residual hauntings ultimately don't exist. I'm going to quote Albert Einstein now. Albert Einstein first came to prominence because he wrote a paper that won an award back in 1909 about energy transfer. He said energy does not die or get destroyed, and it can't be created. So when you die, your energy has to go somewhere, right? A skeptic would say, well, of course it goes somewhere. You get buried and the beetles and the worms and the plants eat your body and the energy gets transferred to them. If you get cremated, the energy gets transferred into heat and light, right? As you got the chimney. I believe, based on Albert Einstein, that energy can be transferred from your body into the surrounding area as information. Now have a think about this. If you have orbs, if you have light, it can't pass through walls. because it has photons and they're particles, and particles can't go through mass. Yet things like X-rays, gamma rays, and radio waves can go through walls and can go through mass. So if that energy is transferred from your body as information, I've just described to you ways in which information can go through walls. So does that not explain, using Albert Einstein's theories,
interesting,
that residual energy can go through walls and it presents itself as information?
That is interesting. And when I was doing research on this topic, that was the quote that kept coming up, that Albert Einstein, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred or whatever. And
I think they've got it. I know where you've been and I know what websites you've been on, and they say that it gets transferred into the walls. And I don't believe that. I think it gets transferred as information. Information is held in the universe in dark energy and dark matter. If you think of microwaves, if you think of black holes, they, in an event horizon, hold information, because microwaves are so fast they can't be held statically. But if there's stuff trying to leave, magnetic energy trying to leave a Mika or a black hole, and if there's stuff trying to be sucked in, it gets held in stasis. So you could argue that the universe is full of places and repositories like a hard drive where information can be stored. And if we want to take that a stage further, think about how UFOs operate and maneuver. If you see a UFO, it appears here, it appears there, it appears over there. You hear pilots in aeroplanes discussing how they just move around. If you've got to traverse the universe, vast distances, thousands and thousands of light years, you're not using fossil fuel or nuclear energy. So I believe they think they want to be somewhere, and the vehicle they've created puts them there. So if you say, imagine going to Walmart, you don't imagine the journey to Walmart, you imagine being at Walmart. The journey is irrelevant, right? So in the same way, ghosts think they want to be somewhere, and they are. They're thinking their energy and their information into another building. The journey, you don't see a ghost walking up the road from the cemetery into the Bark Centre, do you? Do you see where I'm going? So UFOs, in many respects, operate in the same way that ghosts do. And I wonder if aliens have looked at ghosts and thought, we can copy that, we can biomimic that, and that's energy transfer, and that's information transfer as well. So you can tie all paranormal phenomena around those concepts to a degree.
Now, do you believe that, because when I was looking on these sites and everything, they were talking about how if you think ghosts can walk through walls and everything, then it'd be impossible that ghosts would be able to move stuff, physical objects, touch people. If they can walk through stuff, then there's no way that they could potentially knock this thing off or knock your water bottle over. What is your take on that?
They could do both. They can be ethereal and they can be physical. I've been attacked. I think I sent you photographs of people being scratched and attacked. And UFOs are the same. If you apply ghosts and UFOs to the same concept, when you see a UFO appearing, you can see that something's starting to happen, and you can see that it starts to manifest, but it's see-through, it's diaphanous, it's ethereal. In the second stage of that, you can see it starting to come together. In the third stage of that, it's solid. You can see it, it's solid, you can't see through it. In between the third and the fourth stage is the mass then arrives. So between the third and the fourth stage of a UFO, at some point that UFO is going to have to fire up some anti-gravitational equipment or some sort of means of getting around. But between the third and fourth stage, it goes from being ethereal to physical. And I think ghosts, again, are doing the same thing. And you're absolutely right. You shouldn't be able to go through walls, yet exhibit physicality as well. On a very basic level, how can you hear footsteps? Because surely they would fall through the floor, right? They shouldn't have a solid about them. But you're 100% correct. They have ethereal and physical qualities.
Interesting.
But energy can move stuff. That's the point. Energy can focus on individual things to knock them over. It can focus to make that happen. And it still can travel through walls based on the theories that I've just kind of presented in many respects.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's look at some of the pictures you sent us, because I think they're all very interesting, and I got a chance to briefly go through them, but there was quite a bit there, and obviously we don't have the backstory.
Sure.
Let's start by looking at some of the actual pictures where you said you were touched by a ghost, and I saw some of the pictures. They looked pretty violent.
These pictures where like you've been attacked or where some of your buddies have been attacked, is it because you guys are
pissing them off
or what?
It's partly to do with getting attention. That took place with one of my investigators about 8 or 9 years ago at the Mounds Theatre in East Side St. Paul.
Is that someone's back?
Yeah, that was her back. And we were in the basement, and suddenly a very dark energy arrived. I actually think that's demonic, which is incredibly rare. I've only come across non-human entities maybe 3 or 4 times in my life.
Wow.
She's been clawed up from top to bottom. She can't obviously scratch herself on the back, and she had... This is Minnesota and it's winter. She had a big kind of snow Arctic jacket on, and she said, I think I've been scratched. And she took up her sweater and her coat, and she had claw marks all across her back.
Yeah.
If you notice, they're in groups of 3.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, why are they like that?
Yeah, that's Talons, unfortunately. That's a non-human entity. And as a minister, you know, that's mocking the Holy Trinity is what that's doing.
Jeez.
So that's a non-human demonic entity. I was brought up as an atheist, actually, in Britain. My family, Britain's a very secular society. Only 5% of Brits go to church, and I was brought up by 2 scientists, and I'm sure I'm a constant disappointment to them. But when you see that kind of thing taking place, what's your armor? What have you got to go up against that or to protect yourself? I mean, how can you kill something that's already dead ultimately? You can't take a gun with you.
Exorcism.
And so, I pressed myself into God a little bit more. And I'm not here to preach or be highly religious, but I pressed myself into God a bit more because I'd seen biblical evil. So then by default, biblical good must exist. You hear lots of people come into religion because they saw an angel or something divine. I saw pond life and thought, what am I going to do about this? And of course, God is your armor at that point.
So what about this one? We have a thumb, it looks like, and there's 2 marks here.
That's my thumb. This happened about a month ago. This was in Duluth, in a theatre up in Duluth, and I was in the lobby, and that's a bite mark. I actually got bitten on the back of the hand, and that's child's teeth marks. And again, I don't think that was malicious, actually. I think that was just someone wanting to get my attention, and if anyone's ever had children, they'll know they go through an oral stage.
Wow.
So I don't think that was malicious, and I don't think there's anything there that's bad, far from it.
Really?
But that's teeth marks, unfortunately.
Did that feel like as painful as it would, or was it just like...
I noticed something had happened. I wasn't quite sure what it was.
More of a slight pain.
It felt like a mosquito bite.
Oh, really?
I guess more than anything. And then I look and I've got teeth marks in the back of my hand.
Wow.
And this one might be, for me, the scariest one, even more scary than the back one, just because it's right on the neck and right where a collar was, too.
Yeah, that happened in a coffee shop in Jackson County.
Really?
They were doing lots of renovations. And I don't think there's anything in that building. I think it was transient and passing through. But renovations and decorating and moving stuff around really stirs up a lot of negative energy. And there is a history in that block of paranormal activity. The Masons were worshipping and doing their rituals up on the top floor of that block for a long time, back in the 1880s onwards.
And another one, a group of 3.
That's correct.
So this is another non-human, this is a demon, or what?
Yeah, I would say it's a darker energy. I'm not quite sure. Demons have a hierarchy in the same way angels do, so I'm not saying that's the top guy, but certainly there's a hierarchy, and you kind of get pond life at the bottom in the same way you get angels, seraphim, cherubim, archangel. There is a hierarchy, but nothing to be worried or concerned about.
Interesting.
It's just physicality presenting itself on the back of that. It's not something to be concerned about. Again, if you've got God as your armor, nothing can come near you ultimately.
Well, that's an interesting topic, because a lot of people, I know when I was talking to you, you said that Christians can sometimes be the harshest people on you, which is interesting because the Bible's all about loving people and everything. And
you would think so, wouldn't you? But there is a lot of hypocrisy, of course, in any religion. Mm-hmm. But I think some of the more fundamentalist right-wing Christian believers wouldn't like the things I'm doing. But I don't think they've read the good book from front to back. Just off the top of my head, I've had people say to me, you shouldn't be talking to ghosts. And I'll say to them, but in Matthew 17:3, Jesus takes 3 of his disciples into the mountain and shows him talking to the ghosts of Moses and Elijah. And he says to them that they're ghosts. And if you use the cliche, what would Jesus do? There's an example of Jesus talking to ghosts. So at that point, their argument collapses, and they've not read the good book ultimately.
What is their response then to you?
Yeah, what do you usually hear back?
What then happens is, of course, everyone gets defensive, and then they'll start becoming a little bit meaner, a little bit more aggressive. For example, things like Deuteronomy. There's a list in Deuteronomy and Leviticus of the things that you shouldn't be doing if you want to come into the promised land. Bearing in mind, we're talking about a list of rules from 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. But ultimately, they would roll out things like, it says here you shouldn't talk to spiritualists and mediums, and they will keep pressing that. And I have to remind them of the context. The context is they've come from a pagan society, Egypt and Rome, with multiple gods and deities. And God is saying, there's only me now. So he's saying, you can do that, but you've got to do it through me. You can't do it through their deities and their gods. There's only one God. So while they bring up that one individual point that can be argued within the context of history, they're sat there wearing a polycotton shirt, and the next one is you shouldn't be wearing two types of material. They've shaved and cut their hair, which you're not allowed to do either. They're eating meat with blood in it, which you're not allowed to do. They're sat there covered in tattoos, and it says that as well. So while I'm breaking the one, they're arguing with me and currently breaking 5 or 6 at that point. So again, everything can be cherry-picked.
There's hypocrisy.
But it's the context in which it comes in ultimately. But the good book from front to back is full of miracles, healing, ghosts, visions, dreams. The whole book's paranormal from front to back ultimately, and we could sit here for another 2 hours picking out all the parts where these things are discussed. Ultimately.
Well, we have a couple other things I want to bring up for you. We found 4 of the most famous, or in the top 20 most famous ghost pictures of all time.
Okay.
And they were some of these were very scary to me, you know, and I'm a skeptic, but these pictures were very strange, and they're all pretty old is the weird thing. Before the editing or anything people could get very good at that. So here's the first one. I don't know if you've heard of any of these, Adrian.
I've not seen this one before.
This is called Freddy Jackson, the Ghost. This image was taken by Sir Victor Goddard of his squadron in 1919. The ghostly image behind the 4th sailor from the left at the top is believed to be of Freddy Jackson. Jackson died a few days before the photo was taken by walking into a moving propeller. And there at the back, people who are listening aren't going to be able to see this, but if you look up Freddy Jackson Ghost, you can check out this picture. You see a young man there who apparently died before this picture was taken.
I can believe that. That can absolutely happen. And he might want to be with his squadron. They're almost like a family, aren't they? If I want to play devil's advocate, I would say that in that period of history, just after the First World War, it's very comforting for people to think that they would have their loved ones with them when they've died in the First World War. So there may be an element of propaganda. And I will correct you slightly and say you could do a lot in the developing tank. In terms of bringing that back. And we've got no idea of the exact date that photo was taken. So that could have been taken 2 days beforehand. And it wasn't developed. You know how the military works. Nothing moves quickly, does it? No. So, there's many areas that we don't know about.
And one more thing on that picture. That was a very realistic looking thing. For most of these ghost pictures, they look... it's more of a blurriness or like you can't see them all the way. But this looks like a... perfectly clear. Is that strange to you when you take pictures, or is that something that could definitely happen?
I've seen ghosts that look like you and me. You might have walked past 3 or 4 on the way here today and not even noticed.
That definitely fits into your theory, though, of they want to be where they felt most comfortable.
And if he did die just a couple of days after that photograph was taken, he's at the height of his energy. He could fully manifest himself to appear in that picture. The only thing I would say is there's a nice little gap for him to be in. He's not standing over anyone. He's not got in anyone's way.
That is
Why
true.
would there be a gap there for him to be either superimposed into that gap, or the picture was taken before he died? Because they wouldn't stand in a line.
That's a good point.
And leave a gap, would they? So that to me sounds like it's almost a piece of propaganda to say, yes, I know 1 million people have died in this war, but they're with you in spirit and they can still be there. It's almost got a whiff of propaganda.
That's interesting. Well, let's look at another one here. This one is one of the most popular ones, the Brown Lady from 1936. This photo of the Brown Lady is considered by many to be actual photographic evidence of ghosts. It was taken at Raynham Hall in Norfolk, England in 1936. There has allegedly been many sightings of the figure before this photo, and it's said to be the ghost of Lady Townshend. She was locked in a room in the ball by her husband when he found out about her infidelity and left her there to die. What do you think about this one? This is an interesting one.
It is interesting because I've actually taken photographs myself, and one of them's in the soap factory, of a ghost that actually looks like that.
Really?
So I have seen things that look like that. Again, that period of history, when you think about Henry Price investigating Borley Rectory, when you think of the idea of spiritualism really taking off, at the beginning and the middle of the 20th century, lots of middle-class households doing Ouija boards and banging drums and tambourines and trumpets and everything else. And that was done in this area, by the way.
Really?
The Leduc estate in Hastings, General Leduc did Ouija board sessions back in the day. And in Sauk Centre, that was very common amongst middle-class American Midwest families. But again, without having any concept of how that was taken. If someone came to me with a photograph, if you came to me and said, I think I've got a picture of a ghost, the first thing I would say to you is, show me the other photographs you've taken in the same spot. When I took the photograph of the ghost that appears in the soap factory, even though it looks like that, I've got 5 photographs and it doesn't appear in any of the others. So already you've got a control. I would then ask you what shutter speed. I would then ask you what your
to
aperture.
check if it's a long exposure.
Absolutely. I would look at aperture. I would ask you if there was a flash. There's so many things going on with a photograph. Photographs aren't a good representation of what is out there. You could get a photograph of a hummingbird where you see its wings, but I can't see a hummingbird's wings when it's flying. So does that make that realistic or not? Do you see what I'm saying? It presents false evidence. People say we need photographic evidence, but that's the last thing you almost want, because it isn't a true representation of what you can see. If you've got a long shutter exposure, you're seeing a room that's light. With my own eyes, I'm seeing a room that's dark. So already that's giving me false information. You know, at a split second, you're capturing a butterfly or a hummingbird's wings that I can't see with my own eyes. So if you present a photograph of a hummingbird and I can see its wings, is that a true representation of what I can see? So there are some problems with photography, but again, I've got photographs of ghosts, but it's a controlled area. I've taken 5 or 6 other photographs where it wasn't in. The equipment in the room backs up that something just arrived. I've got all the shutter speeds, everything written down. So I'm trying to make sure that people don't say to me, you're making this up. I'm trying to take away every argument that could be presented to me. In Hegelian theory, you present your thesis. You know that someone's going to come along at some point in the future and do a counter thesis, an antithesis. And then what happens? Someone else comes along after that, puts the two together, and then writes the next one. And it keeps going and keeps going, and that's how you create history. That's how you write about history.
What about the editing afterwards? Has anyone talked to you about that?
We do the least amount of editing possible. We don't clean up any of our electronic voice phenomena. What you get played is what happened. We don't put it through a compressor. We don't clip it. We don't do anything with it to tidy it up. On some of the ghost shows, you hear just noise, and they slow it down, speed it up, make it go backwards, and all of a sudden it says like Marjorie. I want to play you the digital voice recorder and say, listen to this, and press the button, and you'll hear it, and it will say what it needs to say. You don't need to mess around with it. But you're absolutely right. A lot of these things can be messed around with in post-production for sure. And we don't do anything. I don't touch the photographs. I don't saturate them. I don't add things to them. It's raw. I could show it to you on the back of the camera and say, this is the picture I took.
This is what you took. Well, one thing I appreciate so much about you, Adrian, is you're not afraid to say, this one didn't happen, or that there are things that people fake and stuff.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who I feel like are jumping on every single little tiny thing. Ghost. But you're not afraid to say, this one seems a little weird or a little fake to me. And you can back up the ones that you actually know, and you have proof of that. Well, there's a lot of people who are just like ghosts. You know what I mean? So I really appreciate that you're able to be skeptical about it, even though, you know what I mean?
I'm a huge skeptic. Yeah. Absolutely huge skeptic. And 95% of the things that I get, I can say, well, there may have been a crack in the window that caused a draft. That banging noise was someone flushing the toilet on the 5th floor. That's pollen. But there's 5% that we get, and you think to yourself, I can't explain that. And that by default means paranormal. It's behind what's normal. Science can't prove what that now is. I think the problem we're getting into at this moment is the fact that we're looking at ways for science to prove stuff that's behind science and beyond science. Science is always playing catch up to man's wisdom and knowledge. In 1992, we thought there was only 9 planets. And they launched the Hubble telescope. I had a poster on my wall in the 80s that showed the solar system with 9 planets on it, right? When they launched the Hubble telescope, we're now in a position where they've discovered 3,000 exoplanets. Does that mean those planets didn't exist before the Hubble telescope was launched?
That's an interesting
Science is always playing catch up. This will be proved in about 100 years' time. In 100 years' time, this will all be proven and I'll look like a genius. Or it's all going to be disproved.
People of the future.
That's right. I'm going to sit here looking like an idiot. So it could go either way at this point in time.
Well, here's another one. This is a very, very, very popular. They made a movie out of it and everything. The Amityville Ghost. You see a little boy there with glowing eyes, and this is not an actual person. This is this kid was dead. And it says about the two people, Ed and Lorraine Warren, obviously very famous.
I've interviewed Lorraine Warren.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And have you seen this picture before?
I have done, yeah. Yeah, I can believe that to be true.
Really?
Yeah, there's some very interesting things there. Again, looking at the flash and the way it throws shadows on various things, that child isn't throwing a shadow.
No.
And if you look, the shadow from the flash on the bottom right-hand corner is off to the right.
Yep.
Well, you should then see the head.
You should see, yeah.
That's right, and that shadow's not replicated. So that would suggest it's either absorbing the light or it's not a solid matter.
Wow. It's so interesting looking at these pictures with you here, because I would have never been able to even point that out, but you can look right at it. You can see the shadow of the railing.
That's right.
There's no shadow on the right of the boy. Wow. And Dalton, there's one more I think on here. This is a more recent one out of all of them, 1997. And you might not even notice the one right away, but there's a guy above her, and that is her husband who died years beforehand. And they didn't notice this picture until after it was developed, or after like a long time, a couple people looked at it. They didn't realize that he was standing right over her head.
I can believe that could happen. I will tell you this. I've got photographs that look exactly like that are superimposed one on the other.
Oh.
But it was taken with a digital camera. I've seen on a digital camera, because I don't know what takes place inside that camera in terms of if something suddenly happens when I press the shutter, like there's a bolt of lightning or an outage, how does that affect, because the information's being transferred through electronic circuitry.
Yeah.
So if my phone goes off and generates a vast amount of EMF at the moment I take that picture, how does that mess up what I've just done? I've taken a photograph next to a car of a person, and as I press the shutter, because it's got a laser that fires out, and it measures the distance so it knows how to focus.
Yeah.
If that's on the same frequency as the car, I've seen car doors open by taking a photograph next to them. So I can believe that to be true.
That's an interesting one.
But I've got photographs where people are superimposed over one another on a digital camera, and you would not think that possible to happen, right?
Yeah,
but I've got that, and it's not paranormal. So again, there's always that sense. I'm speaking from a position where I've got photographs of ghosts, so I'm not shooting this down. But there are other things that can happen that you might want to consider. You know, I could write an essay about why that picture's real, but I could also write an essay on why that picture's fake. Do you see what I mean?
You'd have to see the actual camera and see that picture on the camera.
That's right.
To see the exact, someone posting on the internet.
You'd want to see the negatives ultimately, and want to know how that's developed.
Yeah.
What I will say, going back to how you opened the conversation, people say to me in a bar, I don't believe in ghosts. They have 2 beers and spend the next 3 hours telling me all their ghost stories, with at the end of each one saying, do you think that's a ghost? And I'm like, probably. So that's what happens to me. People will say to me, I don't believe in ghosts.
Dang.
And then I hear every ghost story they've ever encountered in their life. That's right.
Adrian, I wanted to ask you. You were saying something about Ouija boards a while back.
Sure.
What's your take on Ouija boards?
I would never ever use one, and there's several reasons for that. I've done radio chat shows and phone-ins for the last 10 years. No one has ever called in and said, I've done a Ouija board, I've got my dream job, my health couldn't be better, and I've met the woman of my dreams. Every person who's done a Ouija board is saying, the dog's vomiting pea green soup, I've got blood oozing out of the walls, and my kids are floating around, help me. And there's a reason for that. Everything I've done so far in terms of telling you evidence has been done through the equipment. It hasn't come through me.
No.
And when spirits talk to me and I'm being psychic, they talk in my ear. Nothing's coming into me, nothing's possessing me. It's either through the equipment or they're talking to me. I do everything possible to stop entities coming into my physicality, if you like. When you do a Ouija board, you might as well dial a random phone number and see who picks up the phone. You've got no filter. There's no dissemination of what's coming through. And you're saying, here I am, come through me to maneuver the planchette. You've got no idea what's coming at that point. So on the back of that, that's not a good idea. I wouldn't recommend that. If you've got a Ouija board and you want to get rid of it, the best thing to do is bury it or throw it in a lake. If you burn it, the spirits then come out. But I wouldn't recommend that. There's
Here's what I think about Ouija boards. I have seen a lot of people doing them and whatever, and the biggest proof that I ever saw that it is not real and that it's just a toy or whatever. But the thing is, you have to say that it's a toy or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it can't invite things that you don't want into your body.
You can buy them in the child's aisle right
Walmart,
now.
and you can go to Walmart, yeah.
They do a pink version for little girls. So your daughter can open the gates of Hades in the comfort of her own bedroom if she wishes.
But the thing that got me to say this is so fake is when you blindfold the people doing it, you won't get any answers. Right. And if it was spirits or demons coming in through you, it would still be able to move to the right letters and numbers. But if you blindfold the people, it doesn't do anything.
I would agree with you, but you might want to consider the fact that in spirit, you don't have physicality. If I'm using a device that gives them a voice, they don't have, you could argue, a voice box to generate a voice. If you blindfold the person and the spirit's required to come into you, you're stopping them from seeing because they can't see through you at that point. So you could argue that blindfolding the person and it not working would be perfectly reasonable because the spirit can't see. Because the spirits had to come into you. If you then can't see, the spirits can't then maneuver that. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Adrian, I want to show you a picture that we took in an abandoned school in Iowa. And this is a picture that, one of the only pictures I've ever taken where someone has said, there looks to be a ghost behind you. And it's very strange. Here it is. We're in the gym of this abandoned school, and Dalton, you might have to shut off the lights here because it's kind of dark, hard to see. Let's zoom in up here, kind of right above that far guy on the left, Haken's head. I brightened it up here, and if Dalton zoom in right there, you can kind of see what looks to be like a farmer. You can see the eyes and like the nose, and it looks like a beard. Very strange, and I don't know. It was just scary. My cousin was actually the one that sent this back to me and said, "There's someone standing back there." I'm like, "What in the heck?" It's very weird. And go one more picture.
And it would make sense if it was like a farmer because it was on a farmland abandoned school. So
yeah.
That looks like Santa Claus. I think you're being haunted by the ghost of Santa Claus.
Santa Claus is there. Well, I kind of just highlighted like the eyes and the beard and the mouth and everything. What I thought it looked like. We got Old Man Witherspoon or something.
It's Old Man Withers from the amusement park.
Well,
I never grow tired of doing that. I will say that.
Here's my conclusion. The Minor 49er.
Yes.
From Scooby-Doo. I think we ran into him.
Instant classic.
But in all seriousness, there is something strange back there. And like I said, like you were talking about before, Adrian, you got to look at every picture, how it was taken with the flash, the shutter speed. I don't have all that information, but I know the flash was fired in this picture. And maybe it captured a dust or something. What are your kind of thoughts on this?
I certainly think you've got something there. This wouldn't be a picture where you could say that paranormal activity definitely exists on the back of that. What's happened in the past, people press their faces against glass windows. And of course, because of the grease on your face, it leaves an imprint. So if you then take a picture, if you've got a glass window in the background, someone may have pressed their face against the glass. But there is a phenomena where you want to find faces in everything. In human existence, when we look at somebody, our brain recognizes through sensory perception and the psychology of perception the idea of a face. So when we look at the front of a car, we see the twin headlights, we see the fender, and we're seeing faces everywhere, right? So pareidolia, matrixing, is the idea that you see faces in shapes. You may remember being a young child sat in bed and you look at your wallpaper and the patterns on the ceiling and you get scared because you're picking stuff out ultimately. So, you could argue, if you're skeptical, that would be a photograph where you're looking to see a face, but there's something there for sure.
Interesting.
I don't think you're going to win an award for proving that paranormal activity exists, but it gives us an opportunity to sit and talk about it.
It is, and it's because it's something we took, and so to me that was kind of interesting, and that I didn't even notice that someone pointed it out to me. Dal, you had something pulled up there. Go back quick. This is something that we put out. We did polls on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and the results we got were surprising. Are ghosts real? We want your opinion. 64% of people said yes, and 36% said nope. This is on Facebook.
Right.
We go to Twitter. This is Instagram. 50-50 here. And we go to the farthest one over, I think, is Twitter. Are ghosts real? 62% said yes, and 38% said no. So a large amount of people actually believe.
Well, I'm going to throw in a couple of things there. I think when they've done polls in the past, America as a whole is about 30% believe in ghosts. I think what you're getting there to a degree is the people that follow you are going to be a younger audience.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked younger people if they believed in ghosts, they're probably more willing to accept that based on perhaps looser religious views, the idea that you've constantly got the media, films, TV, paranormal activities everywhere.
Yeah.
You won't remember this, but 15 years ago, there was no paranormal TV shows at all. Most Haunted came along in Britain, and then everyone copied that. So even though I'm not a big fan of the paranormal TV show, because I think a lot of that is faked, and it's been proven that it's been faked.
Yeah.
What it has done is created a debate and allowed people to perhaps see paranormal activity. And I think what you're getting there is slightly skewed on the back of the fact that you may be appealing to a slightly younger audience willing to believe over an elderly German Lutheran woman who's perhaps a little bit more set in her ways. So, you know, but you're right, there is a split. And I think Britain, you know, we almost... If you think about the culture of Britain, you've got the idea of Charles Dickens, the Ghost of Christmas Past. You've got all of the paganism, Stonehenge, everything. We've a history going back to the dawn of times of hauntings and ghosts. So if that 60% would reflect Britain very well. But in America, it does tend to be more around 30%, I would suggest.
Wow.
But I think that shows you that younger people are more willing to believe, are more flexible in their views, which is true of most things, I guess. You would say they're more liberal than the older generation.
Interesting,
right?
yeah. Well, we showed you our picture of what we kind of discovered from one of our little adventures. Why don't we look at some of the stuff that you sent me, because you really sent me a lot of interesting stuff, and it'd be interesting to get your opinion on it.
I sent you all my holiday slides.
There we go. Well, here first, starting off, your book.
Yeah, this is one of the books that we have at the moment. It's been very well received. It's got great reviews on Amazon. This is Mysterious Minnesota. I went to 13 haunted sites, some of the most historical sites in the whole of Minnesota. You'll recognise the SS William Irving on the front there, 900 feet of giant red cargo freighter moored up in Duluth. We investigated that.
Wow.
We've got the soap factory that we discussed, the Schmidt Brewery. Every child in this country has to go to Fort Snelling. I think it's part of the law in this country. Did you all take a field trip to Fort Snelling when you was at school?
No.
Okay, not this group then, but mostly no one here.
So in this specific picture, you took this in the soap factory, which you discussed earlier in the episode.
That's a very active building. We've already touched upon that.
Yeah.
I took 5 photographs, and only one photograph had the ghost in it. So I have a control. I have a sense that there's other pictures there like we discussed. The interesting thing about this photograph is there was a 10-second shutter time.
Oh, okay.
So you actually see the ghost moving. You see the locomotion of the ghost from left to right in the movement, like you'd see a blurred photograph of a sprinter or a footballer if you took a 10-second picture of that.
And it almost looks like a lady wearing like a dress or something.
You can certainly see her hand there for sure.
Yeah.
You've got a dress. There's definitely a sense of material. It's very diaphanous and ethereal. You've got a nice straight hard edge, but you also have this element of being see-through as well. So it's a very archetypal kind of image of a ghost, like we saw earlier with the image you showed me from the 1930s of the brown lady. I said I'd taken similar pictures.
Yeah.
And that would be an example of that in the soap factory.
Interesting.
I felt that arrive. As a psychic, I was in that room and I felt an entity come into the room, and I fired the shutter with the cable release on the back of feeling that come into the room. So again, you're getting psychic being corroborated, I guess, with the empirical evidence, and the two sit together. But I could show you 5 pictures where that's not there in the same position. So,
interesting.
Now, is that red part of the machine, or?
Yeah, that's part of the furnace area back there. So you can see through the ghost to the red of the machine.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I think it's some sort of coal scuttle, some sort of a bin or hopper that had the coal in it.
That's not where they threw the dogs or the cats, is it?
That's upstairs. the poor guy in the basement's firing up the furnace because on the second floor they're boiling up the dogs and the cats is what's taking place.
Wow. All right, so we have another picture here. This looks like some kind of creepy baby, like a nursery or something. Yeah,
it's a very odd picture. This was taken in the basement of the Francois Hotel. So we're in Redwood Falls. If you imagine 2nd Avenue in Washington, there's a hotel there. No one... it's derelict now. This hotel's being renovated.
Okay.
So what you get here, they have a Halloween experience on the 31st of October every year. The whole town's involved. They all dress up. They make a lot of money for charity and non-profit organisations.
Wow.
So they've actually turned this building into a Halloween experience. So this is the creepy doll room. But this was a hotel back in the day. And we've got a full spectrum camera. We've discussed that these cameras can see in a wider wave band than we can see with their own eyesight. So when you see a dog or a cat, suddenly look around and you're looking to see, what's the dog looking at? they're seeing
they can see
how we
more.
would see through a full spectrum camera. And that camera's picked up an entity that sat in the rocking chair.
In that chair.
Now, again, this photograph sits alone, but we have evidence within this investigation in this room of the spirit talking to us. We have readings for EMF. We have other empirical data. So we're just looking at the photographs at the moment, but there is other things that happen within that room that backs that up. And this building's very haunted. Back at the turn of the last century, one of the workers was depressed. He walked into the kitchen area where the staff were, and he said, "I'm done. I've had enough. I don't want to carry on." And he drank a whole bottle of strychnine.
Jeez.
I don't think you need that much. And within 2 or 3 minutes, he was dead, and they couldn't do anything about it. So there is a history of death within this hotel. And if you want to go to Redwood Falls, if you go to the Redwood Falls County Museum, they actually have that bottle of strychnine on display.
Well, here's another thing.
That's cool.
Another thing, talking about like the different types of ghosts or whatever. You said this guy died from suicide.
Sure.
And then we were talking earlier about ghosts that have all this energy or that come from a group of people and energy. So can you kind of talk about the different types of ghosts, and then how long are they a ghost for? Because you said there's 2 deaths. So how long is a ghost a ghost? Are they, you've experienced this before. So what has been your experience with that?
To answer your first question, ghosts for me are categorized into 3 main areas. You have intelligent hauntings. These are the ghosts that I can talk to like I can talk to you now. You're sentient. You have an awareness of yourself. I can ask you what your name is, who the president is, and I'm getting responses. You then have a residual haunting, and I think we touched upon that when we spoke about Einstein's theory of energy being transferred into the surroundings. This is where you're in the basement and you see a Roman army walk by, and you can't interact with them.
Yeah.
But you're seeing the footage replayed over and over again at a specific time or a specific date when that happened. You can't interact with it. If you made a song and dance, they wouldn't look at you. They wouldn't know you was there. But you're getting that replayed on a loop at a specific time. And then you get poltergeist activity, which I think is energy, but you can't interact with pure energy. I can't sit here with a battery and have a conversation with it.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 areas. But to answer your second part of the question, it requires energy for you to turn light switches on and off, to walk around, to slam doors, to turn the faucet on and off, to flick your ear, requires energy. So energy dissipates. It's not an endless supply. We've already heard about energy being created and being destroyed. By flicking your ear or shutting the door, I'm transferring my energy into the door slamming, which creates noise and friction, right? Over a period of time, there's not an endless supply. Your energy will dissipate, and this might, in effect, give a reason as to why spirit figures exist as shadows or shadow figures, shadow people, because they can't manifest themselves fully. I believe that over a period of time, if your energy dissipates, you ultimately die twice. You can die physically, and then you can die when your energy runs out in spirit. And we've had that discussion with ghosts. We've sat down with ghosts and we've asked them about this concept, and they've reinforced this idea and said that that's true ultimately. And if we think about the history of mankind, here at one end of a linear line of history, at one end, this is the moment we climbed out the trees and thought that was a good idea 2 million years ago. And over here, we've got the last 150 to 200 years. Every ghost I've ever spoken to, had contact with, or investigated has been from that 150 to 200 year window. And you would think with 2 million years of evolution, we'd see cavemen walking around. But I don't see that. So where do they go? Where's their energy? And I think that reflects that sense of energy dissipating. Ultimately.
The second death.
Interesting.
Yeah, ultimately,
Interesting. Well, let's look at a couple more things here. This is a video that you sent me, and if you just want to give a little background of what it is here that people are about to watch.
Yeah, we're going to see some poltergeist activity. I have thousands and thousands of clips of video where things are being thrown around and moved. This is in the basement of the mechanical room of the Chase on the Lake Resort in Walker. It's a fabulous hotel, very, very haunted. The last battle between the US Army and the Native American Indians anywhere in America took place on Leech Lake here at the Battle of Sugar Point, and I believe 12 soldiers were killed, and they used the hotel as a makeshift morgue until they could get the bodies back to Fort Snelling. So I'm in the basement. I investigated this building 10 years ago, and I've been there a couple of times every year since. I struck up a conversation with a ghost in the basement whose name was Edward. He claimed that he was the ostler. He looked after the horses when the hotel was originally stabling for horses and carriages and so forth. And one of the things he wanted me to do was to feed his horses for him. He was concerned about the horses. Now, when I go on paranormal investigations, I don't take a bag of carrots around with me. I don't take a bale of hay. But I did see that in the lobby there was a bowl of fruit. So I said to Edward, would it be okay if I left some apples out and then the horses could eat the apples? And he said yes. So what you're going to see here in a second, we've set up 3 apples. And if you think about the way an apple sits on the table, you know, it's got lots of points of friction. It just isn't like a ping pong ball or a fishing bobber. It's actually sat on the table, touching it in many places if you think about the underside of an apple. So the apple we're looking at here is sitting on top of a vise in the mechanical room. It's a workshop at the moment for the hotel. And what you're going to see is a chink of light come into the room, because suddenly we heard lots of talking, we heard lots of noise, we heard a real sense here that there was a spirit in this room. So my investigators come back into the room because they hear noise, and it's all shut down, it's a controlled area. And you're going to see the apple basically pushed off of the table is where we're going to be. And it's a good example of poltergeist activity. So here's my investigators wondering what all the noise is in the room and looking into the room, and then the apple goes flying off the table.
And it would take some kind of force to blow an apple off.
Yeah, it's sat on its bottom, if you like. It's not like an apple that's sat on its side. There's lots of points of contact. So someone would have had to have pushed that over.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of these pieces of footage. I've got fishing bobbers, I've got pincers, hammers.
Wow.
You can use anything as a trigger object. You can draw around a quarter on a piece of paper and leave it and see if that's been moved. So you can use lots of things. But again, if you can use a trigger object that's relevant to that individual, he asked for an apple, so I left an apple. You know, if this was Fort Snelling, you know, you could leave a piece of uniform around or something that's military. If it's a religious spirit, you could use a crucifix. This is called the Singapore theory, where you dress up in costumes of the time, or you play music of the time, or you leave trigger objects that are specific to that era and place, because you want the spirit to feel comfortable and to interact with those individual parts. So that was a very effective video showing poltergeist activity.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It is. It's weird that to see it like push the apple off and no one was in the room. We heard you guys coming in from the back or whatever.
They opened the door to look in because they heard movement in a controlled area, locked room. And on the outside of the room, they heard whatever was in there moving around. So they saw the apple come off the table.
Yeah.
They opened the door preempting that would happen because they heard stuff moving around ultimately.
Well, here we have a piece of audio that you sent me, and this is very interesting. You captured this. Well, I'll just let you explain it to people what it is.
Let's play it first so you get an idea, and then I'll talk to you. We'll play it a couple of times, but let's just hear this first.
Okay.
Of that. I think there's a guy down here and that woman. Could you tell me the name of the man that's down here? Peter. Do you prefer being called Pete or Peter?
So we've got a 5, 6, 7 clip there. Let me talk you through this. This is the golden egg of paranormal investigating. This is the best, in many ways, best sort of 5 to 6 seconds of audio evidence you could ever have. We're in the basement of the Wheating Theatre. It's a very old theatre. It's in Toledo, in Iowa. We're in the green room. So imagine there's mirrors, there's light bulbs. The actors would put on their makeup. It's below the stage. I'm sat there with my team, and psychically I see that a spirit has arrived. I can see a man standing by the door. So in the first few seconds of this clip, you hear me say, there's a guy over here. I can see someone standing there, and I verbalise that to the team. So that's me being psychic. What you then get is I have a device called a ghost box, and it generates white noise, and the spirits come through and they talk through the white noise. You may have seen them on some of the paranormal TV shows that are out there. So I turn on the ghost box, I say who's here. You hear the guy say, Peter, Peter. And I then turn the box off and say, he said Peter. Now, in the background, in the space, and you need to listen very carefully, at that point, the ghost then says, Peter, Peter, without any equipment.
Like a whisper.
He's talking to me like I'm talking to you now, without any equipment. I don't hear that in real time because the audio is being picked up by very sensitive recording equipment that I can't hear.
Yeah.
So that gets picked up in the review after the event. What then happens is I turn the ghost box on again, said, can you tell me your name? And stimulus and response. This takes out the random element. You then get the spirit say, Peter again. So let me go through this very briefly and then we'll listen again. You've got me saying there's a man standing over there because I'm seeing psychically. I turn on the ghost box, he says, Peter, Peter. I turn the ghost box off and repeat, he says, Peter, just to inform the rest of the team. In the background, and I'll point when he does it, you hear the ghost tell me, Peter, Peter. I then turn on the equipment again and get Peter again. So I've got 4 things going on there. We've got psychic, we've got ghost box, we've got the ghost talking to me in an EVP, and then we have ghost box again. So let's go through that. And we'll
Absolutely, that's a clarification of that. I think there's a guy down here and that woman. Could you tell me the name of the man that's down here? Peter.
Yeah.
Do you prefer being called Pete or Peter?
Let's just play that one more time. As I said, I say there's a guy standing over there by the wall. The ghost box says Peter.
Down here and that woman.
There
Could you tell me the name of the man that's
This is the
down
ghost
here?
box.
Peter.
And now listen.
Yeah, right there. You can
That's
hear him
creepy.
Do you
whisper.
prefer being called Pete or Peter?
Wow.
Now, ultimately, what happened next, of course, and we've discussed this, I get the psychic, I've got the ghost box, I've got the EVP, I've got Peter coming through. What then takes place is that I go to the Historical Society, I start looking this stuff up, Tamar County, and one of the founders of Tamar County was called Peter Peters. He was actually telling me his name in full, and I've researched this guy. He was there in the 1880s. I've been to his gravesite, and he was a founding member of that town. So then it's very difficult to say that ghosts don't exist and this isn't real, because you've got all that evidence, all that empirical evidence, plus the historical data at the end. It's then going into a book, and that history is being recovered when it was lost to the knowledge of man before those moments.
Well, that's crazy just to hear, because I thought he said Peter, but you actually got the name Peter Peters is the guy's name.
I actually thought that was the case. I thought he was saying his name just twice, like he'd say Adrian.
Yeah.
But then when you go to look that up, and you find the guy's called Peter Peters, there's a chill.
Yeah.
Even now for me, you know, a wizened old historian from Britain, I still get that sense of excitement that you're... Because I still can't believe this is true and it exists. I can't explain everything that goes on in terms of my psychic skills. All I know is that it happens, and I've got the evidence to suggest it happens.
Wow.
If you sat and thought about the process, you'd have to sit in a dark room with a washcloth on your face.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I can't necessarily give you all the answers. I just know that it happens ultimately.
Wow. Well, here's another book, Mysterious Midwest. This is another one that you did. How many locations are in this one?
I think there's about 23 in this one. Historic locations in Iowa, Wisconsin, South Dakota, Minnesota. On the front, of course, you'll recognize Loon Lake Cemetery and the Witch's Curse.
I was going to ask you about Loon Lake.
Yeah, we've been over there many times. David Ellison of Megadeth actually wrote the foreword to this book because he's from Jackson County.
Wow.
And Megadeth wrote a song called Mary Jane about the Witch's Curse.
Wow.
Yep.
So I worked with David Ellison quite a lot with this, and we went out there with Megadeth and did an investigation with them.
Well, that's awesome.
And he talked to the witch through the equipment. I find it very odd that I'm cross-promoting with Megadeth, because here I am as a middle-aged British historian. And if you go to Megadeth's site, you'll find my book for sale.
Oh, really?
So we are cross-promoting, and this is where I say you need to buy Megadeth's albums.
There you go.
They're very good.
You guys can plug each other.
That's right.
So here we have a blue light, an orb, as you were talking about earlier. And how can you differentiate this one from, let's say, one of the other ones you said could be dust coming up from a couch?
Sure. This one was taken in the basement of the abandoned school in Moulton in Renville County.
Oh, really?
And it's actually emitting a light. There's no flash being used. We actually sat in the dark and we saw the orb illuminating light, and it was pulsing and fading in and out, and we could see it flying between the lights, and we took a series of photographs of it. So we took a lot of video footage, we took several photographs, and there would be an example of an orb that's actually illuminating itself. It has its own energy. It's not required for the flash to bounce back off of that to then present the picture ultimately.
Well, that's very strange, actually. Yeah, because it kind of looks like a... I don't even know. It wouldn't really be like a flashlight or anything because of how blue it is.
Yeah, it's very bright, and the whole team saw that, and we traced it and followed it, you know, around the ceiling in between the lights. There is a series of photographs of that where you see it fading in and out. But that would be a good example. That would be the 5% where it's illuminated and you think that's not dust, that's not moisture, it's generating its own light.
Mm-hmm. And you had another picture that you sent me. It was of a ghost that you said it could have had to do something with the Masons. I think it's a bottom picture, Dalton.
Yeah, this was in Fairlawn, which is a fabulous mansion house up in Superior. It's got 40, 50 rooms, and it was built by a lumber baron and a miner.
Looks like a hooded face.
This was Martin Patterson's desk. Martin Patterson built this amazing building, this amazing mansion. And again, I took 5 photographs with a tripod, no flash, and in one of the photographs, this blue hooded figure appears. It's almost a bit Scooby-Doo, isn't it? But I think rather than being a sort of phantom with the eyes and the mouth going on there, my best guess as to what this is, Martin Patterson was very heavily involved with Masonic practices in the Masonic Temple, and I did get a chance to investigate the Masonic Temple in Superior as well. And they have hoods that look like this.
Really?
There's a ceremony. I don't want to give too much away. I think most people know now by going online. But in the Masons, if you want to become a Mason, they would put a hood over your head and they would put a skeleton in front of you or a skull, and then they would pull the hood away, and you're meant to confront your own death, your sense of dying and mortality. So I think, based on what I know about Martin Patterson, I think that's a Masonic hood. But again, it didn't appear in the other photographs, and it's an anomaly. It shouldn't be there.
That's very strange, actually. That is, I don't know.
It's creepy.
It is creepy, yeah.
That's a very haunted building. Again, it's one of the chapters in my book. There's a swimming pool that's been drained, and it's in the basement, and it's not had water in it since 1920. And we set equipment down there and heard children splashing around in the swimming pool.
Really?
For 3 or 4 minutes, you could hear people splashing around in a pool that's been drained since 1920.
That's very creepy.
Jeez. Well, we've looked at a ton of stuff here that Adrian has given us pictures and video, also stuff that we found. And it's just been really good to kind of go through it all and get your opinion on it. It's been very interesting. And I know that you said that you'd be willing to come back with the equipment. We can actually get it out here and some of it. Because I know for a lot of people, the reason they're so skeptical is because they're confused. And I know that for me, just talking to you tonight, that I feel a lot more, intrigued in it. I'm certainly going to go home and look into it. I wouldn't say I'm a big believer now, but you definitely have convinced me that there's something out there, and that I definitely need to do my research before I just say, oh, people who believe in ghosts are a bunch of lunatics or whatever.
I can't believe this is the be-all and end-all. An atheist would sit here and say, no, when you're dead, you rot. But that's not the reality of the situation. I can say, honestly, as a sensible, well-educated guy, that I've seen so much in the last 25 years with the books I've written and the evidence I've got, that there's more. I don't profess to know everything, but this isn't the be-all and end-all. That's the facts. It just isn't the case that when we die, we ride. It's not the facts.
Yeah, well, I think, like I was saying, getting that equipment here and everything and getting people to see how you actually use it and how you interact with it would help a lot of people understand what you're actually doing and what that all means. So I think that'll be awesome if we can get you back on here. But we really appreciate having you. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome talking to Adrian, getting a professional opinion on a lot of this stuff versus us just checking out videos on YouTube about ghosts. We actually have you here to break it down.
After tonight's show, there's no reason why people can't write into you, and we can perhaps do a little bit where we're answering those questions, and we'll get the equipment. We'll see what happens. We may well sit here with nothing happening, listening to white noise for an hour. But I'm fairly confident, based on the things I've experienced in the past and based on the building we're in, that we'll have something, and we can plug that straight into the soundboard, and people can hear those ghosts. So we can have a real time conversation, and we'll see what takes place.
Well, I think that'd be awesome, especially since the studio's in a haunted building. That helps us out big time. So everyone should check out Adrian's stuff, though. Adrian, if you want to plug some of the stuff, I know you said you're talking in Morton coming up here. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I'm going to be in Morton on the 26th of April. That's a Thursday in Renville County. It's $5 to get in. All the money's going to charity. Awesome. It starts at 7 o'clock. If you go online, you'll find all the details. I'm talking about the art and the symbolism of the cemetery, what all the markings and all the carvings, the angels, what everything means. So it's not going to be ghost related, but the art of the cemetery. My background is in art history. Don't tell everyone, by the way. But that's a really good talk for me and how that comes about. I have a radio show, if people are interested, at 8 p.m. on Friday evenings on the Dark Matter digital network. We go out, 100,000 listeners in 190 countries all over the world. The show's called More Questions Than Answers. It's a comedy paranormal show where we look at the week's news in a comedy quiz format, and that's on SoundCloud as well. You can listen anytime you want. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. If you go to SoundCloud, MQTA Radio, if you're interested, there's 5 years worth of shows there. You can listen to them on long journeys, walking the dog, in the gym, whatever you're doing.
Check
you
them
can
out,
listen to those.
And plus the books,
absolutely. My books
on
are
Amazon.
Available on Amazon. They're available in bookshops. If you type in Adrian Lee, you'll find all my books on Amazon, and they've all had fabulous reviews, so everything's there for you. You can join my Twitter account, Adrian_Lee_tips. And finally, we have a Facebook site for the radio show. All of the week's news of the paranormal, cartoons, jokes. There's a big community on there. More Questions and Answers with Adrian Lee on Facebook, and I'll answer your questions on there as well.
There we go. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, Adrian would be happy to answer those, and just make sure that everyone has more time, because we didn't have a lot of time to talk to Adrian. So there's more options there if you're interested. Thank you everyone for watching. We're going to be giving a t-shirt away, so all you have to do is share this post or retweet it, whatever works for you. We'll put all those names into a drawing, and next week we'll announce a winner. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This has been a great episode with Adrian, and make sure you check out all of his stuff. We will be back next week. I'm not sure who with. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and on iTunes. Thanks for watching.
Yes, and I hope you have a good night's sleep tonight.